Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to another episode of the Coffee Roaster Warm Sessions podcast. We have a very killer podcast lined up, I think, for today with Douglas Weber from Weber Workshops. It's going to be awesome. We're going to talk all things Weber, a little bit of Doug's background, and then we'll see what just learn some more things about what you guys do over there. So, Doug, thanks for joining on.
Well, thanks for having me, gentlemen. It's a good morning here in Japan, and I trust that it's nice over there in Washington as well.
It's okay. It's
we've had better. We've had better. Yeah.
You've got some warm coffee to get you through it.
Insane.
Yeah. Exactly. So, what have you been drinking lately, coffee wise? Do you drink coffee? Are you a big fan?
No, I hate that stuff. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, I don't know.
Kidding.
Maybe you're just like
No.
like engineer. You just love making cool stuff. So
no, I got into this because of a love for coffee. I think I loved coffee shops before I even loved coffee. Back 30 years ago in high school and stuff, when I would hang out at coffee shops just because of the vibe and liking the atmosphere. And I think the actual appreciation for the drink came afterwards.
Same.
Yeah, I was really, really into it, I guess, about the time that specialty coffee kind of came to the West Coast when I was still in San Francisco, in that area. And just, it hit me hard. I think it hit everybody hard, like around where I was in San Francisco. And ever since then, I got spoiled from like the early good stuff. And then I was also spoiled by being able to travel a bunch for work and head to places like, Copenhagen back like when places like Coffee Collective were getting started, and just kind of making that part of my my travel itinerary, even for business, was like hit up the good coffee shops in any city that I go to. And I still do that to this day, but become more and more, blessed, if you will, by being involved with a lot of like the really, really good players in the industry. And so I get to drink a lot of really nice stuff. Some that I roast myself, and some that I get from really well known or not known at all roasters when I go to coffee shows. So
heck yeah. That's awesome. You threw in just a slick comment that you roast yourself. Do you do that often, or what are you roasting on?
Quite a bit. I have two roasters here. I have an Ileo Bullet, the R2.
Yeah.
So if I'm doing anything that's like conducive to drum roasting, I use that, and then I also use a roast, the P100. Is it?
That's right.
And I was one of the people that got bitten by air roast coffee pretty early, and I blame Klaus for that, because it was like 2013 or 2012, like soon after he opened Collective in Copenhagen, and I was there, and it was like, how good can a €7 espresso really taste? And it blew my mind. And and I think a lot of it was just like the cleanliness from that compared to the drum roasted stuff from San Francisco in the day. Even with like the same raw input, it was just like, wow, you can really take away a lot of the noise from this thing and focus on the signal of really, really good coffee. And that was before things were even being super light roasted. And personally, I'm still like a medium roast fan. Like I tend to drink things all over the spectrum, but I gravitate towards, light medium to a medium developed stuff. Yeah. But cleanliness is something that I really, really go after in coffee.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, cool. We've had an ongoing discussion on the pod about brewing methods. I mean, a lot, but specifically around batch brew and filter coffee, like pour over single cup filter coffee. Do you have a preference? Because we every single episode we brew batch brew, so we're kind of used to that a lot for the podcast episodes. At home, we brew a lot of single cups. So
I have a lot of thoughts on that. I mean, I was primarily, an espresso drinker for the first, I think, 20 years of being into coffee. Part of it, I think, is also my personality type. When I do something myself, I want to have control over the variables. I'm very much an engineer in that sense, and being able to control things like water temperature and pressure and, everything, like, really appealed to me. And I was able, being able to dial in based on that was something that spoke to me. And when I would have something, unfortunately, I think the vast majority of like filters or pour overs, especially 20 years ago, were disappointments. And so the only time I would ever enjoy it was when somebody who was kind of in my network or a friend who was really good at it, or, barista champ or somebody would make coffee for me. I could have a great cup and I'd be like, yeah, I'll enjoy this. But if I try to do it myself, I find myself subject to the whims of the machines and feeling how, I guess, incomplete that as a system was. And as an engineer, I would look at the devices and the stuff and be like, well, I just don't like this. I want control over this, but I don't have control because I'm limited by the gear. And that's why I didn't really get into that stuff until actually we started to make a product that allowed me to brew stuff in the filter realm that was more in line with my philosophies around how coffee should be brewed. And we can talk later about that. That's So I do drink stuff from The Bird now, which has opened my eyes to a lot of different styles of coffees. But if it comes down to batch brew or filter, batch for sure. I mean, batch is like so much better to like make even. Like you're going to get like a really good, like
consistent,
just really consistent versus like the whims of a one-off sort of filter. So
especially if you're going into a cafe that is your first time,
if you go into first time, batch brew is the only way to go.
Batch brew. Until you
unless you really trust somebody who's been there and is like, you go here and you get this.
Exactly.
There's only a few people that you can really trust to that level.
That's true.
And especially like you mentioned earlier about the fact that when you used to travel in the beginning, like traveled for work and found places that you could get good coffee in. We still do that a lot. Like every single time we're going somewhere, we book an Airbnb near the cafe that we want to visit to more frequently. I find that very, agree. That's a very interesting trend. I have a regular that actually lives in New York that comes to the cafe in Bellingham simply because he's like made it a stop that if he's gonna Airbnb, it's near the cafe, which I think is super cool and super neat just to even think about that concept. That's kind of those limitations around geography have like decreased more because of the preference of certain cafes and certain types of coffees have become more important than the geography.
I think it's also become a very powerful tool when looking up where to stay in a new city. Like I was just staying in Honolulu of all places over Christmas this year, and one thing, it's a general rule, but I just saw it applied again. It's like when I go to a place in a city I don't know very well, like a really good indication of which neighborhood to stay in is find like the best coffee shop and try to go where they're at, because they usually have already sort of sussed everything out. They're going to be in like the good neighborhoods, and even if not in the best neighborhood, at least you got good coffee, and it solves that problem. So
that's great. So cool. Right on. Well, let's dive right into it. We mentioned a little bit of, kind of teased it a little bit of like your work, traveling a lot. That's been kind of, very, very natural for you to be in that a little bit. You have this background of working for Apple for, I think 13, 14 years or
13 years. Yeah. I mean, a little bit more if you consider some school times work there, but yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Can you tell us a little bit about, how your experience at Apple and maybe your work there has kind of influenced you starting Weber, but also how you also go about to creating all your products at Weber? I'm assuming there's like a strong influence. And when I found out that you worked for Apple, I was like, interesting, that like there's a few things that kind of started to make sense a little bit. So maybe talk a little bit about kind of that transition, and then some of the things that you took from Apple into Weber.
Sure. I mean, I really owe it to Apple, I'd say, for defining how I came to, look at, think about, and develop products. I started there when I was still a student, doing internships in the summertime and then going on full time right out of school. And you got to remember, this is back in close to year 2000 when Apple was kind of nothing. It was like, is it going to fizzle out? Is it going to die? It was the very beginning of the iPod before the iPod was really a thing. So I was, really lucky to go on as I think the 4th member of the iPod team. So second generation iPod when it was still very, very, very small volumes. And be part of a very small, core team that sort of defined, engineered, and brought to fruition these underdog products that came to define the future of, portable music. And yeah, I was really, really lucky. And I also had that sort of, I just mentioned before, the interest in coffee, and I'd always wanted to do something kind of myself, like start a company, not necessarily start a company for starting a company. I wanted to make things that I liked and that I knew couldn't be had unless I made them. And I knew early on that I wanted to do something in coffee, but I also had this really, really cool job that let me fly around the world and design iPods and then iPhones and, like have an unlimited budget to hire people and do cool shit. And that really kept me, I wouldn't say it held me back. It allowed me to like learn at a really accelerated pace for over a decade and hire a bunch of really talented people and basically learn from the best people in the world about materials, manufacturing, design, and all of that. And everything from, a top-down management perspective too, back when Steve was still alive and we would have meetings with Steve and Johnny and like the sort of legends of the design world and talk about, all right, like, are we going to do this or are we not going to do this? And these are people who, had like the balls to like kill off amazing projects just because they're like, no, like we should be doing something better. And they were very, very honest with that about, like, it's something that people always ask me today of like, what's a key thing that differentiates, our company from others? And I'd say one really big thing that I learned from Apple is at any point in a project's timeline to be able to look at it and be like, all right, given where this is today, should this product exist? And if you can say no to that, you got to fucking kill it. Because it's like that there's a lot of things that you could do and would probably sell and be okay. But when you genuinely and honestly ask yourself, like, should this exist? And you can say no, like, are you really adding anything to the environment, to the industry? Are you pushing anything forward?
Right.
And there are elements of that are, driven from innovation or technology or patents. And there are elements of it that are driven purely by design. We try to, take the really important elements across the board. I think innovation is really important, but innovation for innovation's sake isn't always the right thing. For example, we just released a tamper at the end of last year, and people have been bugging us for a tamper forever, and we have an issued patent on the tamper with a bunch of tech in it, and that's really innovative. But the one we decided to bring to market was not that. It was not an innovation. It was purely an experience and design and something else. It's one of the few times that we brought a product where we're like, this is not innovative. Like, do not buy this if you're looking for some crazy innovation, because it's not that. It's a self-leveling temple, but those have been around. Ours is just a really good implementation with our aesthetic and our focus on quality. And that by itself can be successful, but that's a rarity for us. We try to keep things, we try to do stuff that's never been done before. And that's one of the examples where we didn't, but it still fits in line with our ethos.
Dude, that's incredible. That's great. I'm gonna have to re-listen to that a few times because I think that's just such a great philosophy, but it's also somewhat ruthless as well, because you're just like, it is or it isn't. It is what it is, and there's no sugarcoating, and either it needs to exist or it doesn't, and that's it. I
think that's a very big differentiating factor from like good brands and good products to those that are out there to just, I don't know, sell stuff. Like, I'm not in the business to sell stuff. Like, obviously we have to have things, sell in order to feed the engine and to make this work. But we've gotten to a point where we know that this engine works, and now we got to use that to do good. And that's what we're trying to do, is really move the needle for the industry, do good by our own people, do good by our customers, and kind of open the eyes of as many people as we can in the process.
Yeah. And I mean, speaking of innovation, I would love to dive in and hear the history of like EG1 and the prototype grinders that y'all created and dropped. I remember seeing the EG1 for the first time, and a lot of the thoughts that came to my mind were, okay, what is this? Like, is this a telescope? Is this like a coffee tool? Like, is this really a grinder? And there was a lot of curiosity, and I think it's because you guys really kind of shook up the grinder industry and brought something up that I was like, personally, I think at that point, no, I was already working in coffee, but even as a home barista, I was like, oh, this is different. And with that said, would you kind of highlight and kind of give like a highlight reel of how that idea came to mind?
Sure. I mean, really, really macro. Like when I started the company, even before I started the company, I was getting into single dosing my coffees. And I had like bought several commercial grinders because it was the best grind quality you could get at the time. And I was trying to, hodgepodge them together to be a decent single dosing grinder, and virtually impossible. If you bought anything that was like on the market and tried to make it a single dosing grinder, there was, I won't name any names, but there were some things back in the day that was like, okay, it wasn't the best experience. And I was always like, I can do better than this. Like, I know that there's a way. And the other really big thing for me is you would walk into cafes, and you'll still see this today, somehow 10 years later, people using, a big EK or something on the bar, dropping in the thing of coffee, and then like, slamming the thwacker, and then like weighing it on a portafilter and throwing away some coffee. And I was like, holy shit, like you got this like really, really high quality product, and you're throwing away 10% on every shot just because you can't get the right number of grams in and out.
Oh, dang.
Like that is like fucking crazy. And if you consider that the top of a pyramid of like really high quality stuff, and you're throwing away the stuff at the top, like imagine how that percolates down on that pyramid. It's like you are disrespecting the farmers, you're disrespecting the roasters. This is a flawed system. And because like the machine is bad, and of course the machine's bad, it's a 60-year-old German like tank, like it's not going to be relevant to what we're trying to do today. And so that was my mission number one, was fix that and make sure that whatever you put in comes out. And the other thing that I knew from having these machines and taking them apart all the time to try to reconfigure them to be single dosing grinders was like they're really gross on the inside. And so when you open them up and you see old coffee stuck in there, and you like scrape it off and stick it together and smell it, and you're like, wow, the inside of this thing smells rancid. Like that's horrible. Like just before we started this podcast, I refilled my little water thing here, and I realized that the jug that I had filled up with water just yesterday from a place up in the mountains had like a little bit of an off smell in it. Like there was like, I think it was like moldy or something on the inside. One of my jugs, I like filled up 10. And I took that one and I dumped it into my stainless thing. And the water that I drank before this, I could smell that just because there was a faint smell of like that mold or something like in my old water jug, tainted the entire like thing of water. And it does the same thing with coffee. And so I just literally right before I threw it away, dumped in a bunch of, like near boiling water to sterilize that other tank and get rid of everything. But that same thing happens with a coffee whenever you're trying to like run it through a grinder. And that's why it's really imperative to have your grinder super clean. So it was like, this thing has to be cleanable without tools, and it has to be done like within a few seconds, because if it's not, then people aren't going to do it. And if they don't do it, then everyone's going to have this like aromas of mold and old coffee like coming into their shots. And that was, the really big things. Get out what you put in, make it super cleanable. And then, because we were doing that, it's like, okay, we got to rethink this thing. There was talk, back in the day about alignment and other stuff. And it's like, we completely re-engineered everything so it doesn't work the way that other ones work to align your grinder. And that's intentional. Like when you clean it, you don't disrupt your grind setting. It's little things. That was kind of like the impetus for it, though. It's like, make a single dosing grinder, because single dosing grinders didn't exist yet. It was really the first one that was commercially made to be, filling that niche. So that was what we're thinking.
Yeah, that's killer. I'm assuming like rethinking everything and kind of approaching this with these kinds of problems that you're trying to solve. I'm assuming you guys ran into some constraints and some challenges, or maybe you didn't, but I'm assuming you guys did. Did you guys, and can you share a few of what are some of those challenges in the engineering process where you're like, we want to reach a certain goal with this grinder with the EG1, but then there's some things that you guys have to manufacture or rethink, and yeah.
For sure. I mean, it's like that with kind of anything. One thing I have a really like keen sense of what can be done and what can't be done. I've made a lot of products over the years, significantly more complex than anything that we make right now, at Apple. And that's why when I look at these things, I'm like, it's complicated because it's solving a new problem, but it's not complicated compared to the other things that I've experienced and seen. And so one thing that I know how to do really well, and the people on my team know how to do really well, is to iterate. And so when we develop something, we get to a point where we can look at it on screen in CAD and have a certain degree of confidence that it's going to work. But you never know until you make it. So we'll do that, we make it, get a prototype, we run it through, and we're like, shit, like this is where beans are catching, or this is where, stuff is going to build up. And it's like, well, how do we improve upon that? Take a couple iterations just on that part and do that. How do we, like kind of everything? What happens when something gets stuck in there? Like, what's the purge mechanism? For example, like we look at things like RPM control. Like the EG1 was the first variable RPM coffee grinder out there, and it wasn't because like we knew that like we need to change the RPMs on it. Is we went to a different motor technology because we wanted it to not put off heat, and we wanted it to not burn itself out the way that like other AC driven motors would if you dropped a rock in there. And so that begged the need to have a little bit of smarts in it. And so we're like, okay, well, RPMs are a freebie because of the motor technology we're using. It's not going to give off heat, but if it did, we're going to put it where it doesn't actually adversely affect the grind chamber. So we'll put it up top and like flip all that stuff around. And by adding, the RPM control in there and like the other stuff, it's like, okay, now we can actually PID this, because like we were already PIDing like our old espresso machines with Arduinos and crap from way back in the day. But we can do the same thing or add that same logic to the RPMs of the grinder. Then as it's grinding, you can always try to hit a specific RPM and not have it like, fluctuate so much.
Yep.
And so all those things became sort of first, and then, fast forward a few years and you kind of see it all over the place in grinders. It's like, we did it because it was a byproduct of the technology we were using. And then we left it up to sort of the baristas and the other people to see exactly what impact that would have. We knew from our own studies that, you can change the PSD, like the particle size distribution, by changing the RPMs, but it's hard to say. And it's also very bean dependent on whether or not it makes a difference. It's also bird dependent. And so there's all these like variables at play. And it's like, there's so many variables that doesn't really need to be the one. Like, that's not the hill to die on. But if it's a freebie, you can throw it in there. It's like a thing to do, but I don't think it's like that defining in terms of product. It's just a nice to have.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of the problem solving that you had to do is more or less like solving a Rubik's Cube rather than a jigsaw puzzle. So does that make sense, or is that like
I'm like, when was the last time I did either one of those?
Yeah, exactly. I have a 4-year-old daughter, so jigsaw puzzles are like a big piece, and I can't wait till she can dive into a Rubik's Cube. That's going to be exciting. Math is a important thing for me and our family. So, but yeah, and the interesting thing for me is also, the more you talk about the EG1 and just the products you create, I think every single time that I've encountered a product that y'all released, I've been captivated, what you've described, the user experience, the innovation behind it. But also, I mean, this might be a side tangent coming off of everything you said, but also kind of the flair behind everything you guys do in a good way, which makes sense now, knowing your background and, everything that you've done. It makes a lot of sense. So here's a little nerdy question that I want to throw out there.
Sure.
The Moonraker. Absolutely obsessed with the Moonraker, right? Now, is there a very big influence from 007 James Bond Moonraker from 1979?
Well, like, here's the thing: is like before naming the product, we had like a probably a 5 or 6 other names for it, and a lot of them were like going to be watchmaking style names. Like for a while, I wanted to name it based on like a watchmaking city, like it was maybe going to be the Geneva or something else. And that was like really like up until like the very, very end. And then it got into like I spent a lot of time thinking, usually in my off time, like when I'm not working, is when I think about product names. And for no reason, like I keep it very democratic inside of our company. Like anybody can name our products if they come up with something that's better. But we try to be very, very honest about what's the best name. And then when we got to that one, it was like, I don't ever intentionally put James Bond themed stuff into our products. Like I'm open and honest about that.
Yeah.
A lot of times it happens sort of just by happenstance. This was one of those where I was like, damn it, we have planetary gears. It's got like this moon and like sun thing going on. It's raking the coffee. I was born in 1979. I was just like this is the only name that it could be. It's like,
so
as soon as I caught on, I was like, ah, shit, I can't name it anything else. And I looked up and strangely enough, I have it on my table somewhere here. We now own the trademark to Moonraker. It was not a trademarked like claim, so we own like the word Moonraker. And I was like, wow, you can buy that? I was like, okay, like, and you know, it comes from like a really, really cool thing of like, it's a word originally from British English back in, I want to say like the 1700s. It was like a little sail they would put at the top of their mast to like tell you which way the wind is blowing. So it's got a really like, it's just so many cool connotations, and like, it just really hit every step of that. And it was like, we knew at the time that it was really, really unique. You know, like we had looked at spinny tools for needles and stuff, and like we knew they didn't work. We knew that they caused fines percolation at the bottom, and it's like when we ran our testing, it's like, it doesn't make coffee better, we're not going to make it. And this was one where we're like, okay, if we use needles, it has to be absolutely like minimal amount of movement inside of the bed, but that movement has to be randomizing. It can't be circles. And that was where we're like, that's where we got to a spirographic pattern, and that was actually very unique. Like when we came out with this, it was one of those things where it's like, as soon as you say it, everyone's like, oh, duh. But like, okay, so why has no one said that for the past 10 years? Or 20 years or whatever. And, you know, when we did it, it wasn't like come up with this idea and put it out the next week. It's like we iterated on 10 to 20 different like patterns of spiraling, because just doing a spirograph doesn't do it. You have to like optimize that pattern to get it right. So we did all that, and we spent a year doing that and geeking out on it in the background in order to have like a launch where it's like, boom, this is it. And that's why we think as far as needles go, it's like, it's as good as it gets. But there's a whole needle versus shaking conversation, which I'm happy to get into as well. But
that's true. We kind of geeked out on that on a couple episodes ago, I think. But
cool.
That's like,
that's I want to talk a little bit about, as we're kind of nearing the end of the podcast, but talking a little bit about, you guys have the Moonraker, you guys did the portafilter, the Unibasket, the Bird, which is just a very interesting product where it's like, I don't know, just the first time I saw it, I was like, what the heck? Like there's like this spinning thing inside of a French press, and what looks like a French press, but it's technically not anymore a French press anymore because of how it like works. I'm curious if you guys have any like constraints or frameworks that you've placed for your designers or your team that you guys have to follow, because it seems like most Weber products fit a lot of, I mean, everything that you've mentioned to the, you know, in this episode, but they follow like some I don't know, there's like a feel to it, like some kind of guideline that seems like everything is being funneled through. Do you guys have like some constraints that you guys have in place where it's like, we just don't cross this and we play within these bounds, but still giving a lot of room for creativity and freedom and exploration?
For sure. I mean, the one guiding factor is I have to want it. Like, it has to be something that like I look at and I'm like, I understand why this thing should exist, and I want everyone on my team to think the same way. Like, if we're not excited about it, like, no way. Like, we're not going to do it. And for me to be excited about something, there has to be something new. It's like, I'm not going to make anything that's like another Me Too, like something that fits on the shelf next to XYZ other ones. That's just like, what are we doing if we're doing that? It's not why we're here. And I think we are capable of thinking outside of the box, of inventing, and being pretty decent with the design and being very careful about the integrity of our supply chain. Something we didn't even go into. I mean, ours are some of the only products you're going to find that aren't made in mainland China. And there's an entire discussion to be had about that too, about where does your money go for coffee products? Is this stuff going towards governments that then gets funneled into Russia's invasion of the Ukraine? And this is my political play. I'm able to define my supply chain and do whatever I can to make sure that people who are consuming coffee and part of this global network are doing things with integrity and keeping things in a way that makes the world tomorrow better than the world is today. I believe in that, and that goes beyond money. And it has nothing to do with, xenophobia or other things. I've got many great mainland Chinese friends, but when it comes to governments and other stuff, it's like, well, we should think about this. It's important conversations and ones that we shouldn't shy away from. And I wish there was a bit more discussion of that in the industry, but without being too political. Because at the end of the day, we're here to enjoy coffee together, and that's thing number one. But there's a lot of side discussions too. Great stuff for coffee parlor banter. Yeah.
That's fun. Thanks for adding that in. That's good. It's giving some food for thought. What about I want to ask, what about your guys' design ethos? There seems to be a common, if you think about, I don't know, I heard this is just an example, but I was talking about marketing with some friends, and we're talking about what's his name, Seth Godin, who brought up the example that if Nike was to build a hotel, you can pretty much vaguely kind of picture what that would look like, where if a hotel chain would make a shoe, you won't always know. Where it's with Weber, it's you see the grind, you guys release the grinders, and all of a sudden you're starting to get a feel as to what Weber looks like and feels like, where you can think about what would a Weber portafilter look like, or a distribution tool. Yep. And it seems like you guys have established something very incredible throughout all your product lines. Can you speak to that a little bit?
I would say the underlying theme there is just a sort of, I guess, a semblance of design integrity. I mean, everything does have to come to me to look at and say, is this going to fit in with our stuff? And I've got a very specific taste, a very sort of clear guiding light for what I like in terms of products. And I have a very small group of people that I trust for a feedback loop. And we're very open, and we really beat on every iteration of every design before we give it the okay to move forward. And, if you look at the people on our board for the company, it's a couple of them are some of the best industrial designers the past 50 years who came out of Apple as well. And these are, good close friends. And then we have people who are very much entrenched in the coffee industry as well, who have thoughts on the coffee. And strangely enough, the designers and the people that also really love coffee, and the people who love coffee who really love design. So it tends to fuse there. Something that would be really interesting if you've got time, if you Google up something like NASA design guides. There's a long history of brands, and it's something that most brands I think do internally, and we do as well, of sort of defining what it is that is the sort of undertone of your design and keeping things consistent across. A couple years ago when we did a revamp of our site, we decided that we need a company font, and I found a great font maker in the Czech Republic, who's a place that has a long history of typeface design. And it was he was asking me what is the font that's going to be for Weber? And I was I don't know, just basically off the cuff, I was it's the font that the newspaper would be printed on if man colonized the moon. So it's like if you wake up on the moon and you're drinking your morning coffee and you open the newspaper, it's the font for that. And that was like, so if you open our stuff and you look at the website, it's like, okay, that's what it is. And I think he nailed it. And it was like, yes, that is, and it's the little stuff and caring about those details and then carrying them through to kind of everything that really helps set the tone for brand and design integrity.
Killer.
I love that.
Yeah,
that was
that's
so
awesome.
good.
That's awesome. Cool. Last question. Can you give us a little glimpse as to Weber in the next couple years? Maybe some things that you're seeing in the coffee industry that are lacking or that you feel is like an open hole, just like the EG1 where you're like, single dose needs to be rethought. Or is there something that's like catching your attention a little bit?
There's always stuff catching our attention. I know you're trying to trick me into like divulging our roadmap, which I'm not going to do, but I can assure you that we've got a lot of stuff kind of in the pipeline, and we're really excited about the things that we're working on right now. I think that this year it's only going to get more exciting. I mean, the way that I look at it for this company, we're just getting warmed up, and there's so like the really fun stuff and the juicy bits are all yet to come, and that's why I love it. Like I can't get enough of this. I wish there was more than 24 hours in a day, and I wish I had an infinite, capacity for caffeine consumption, because all of it just makes me happy, and it's fun to work on. I'm just glad that I get to.
Love it. Well, I'm excited to see what that is going to be. Definitely feel like we'll try to get some hands on more Weber products in the near future. I've been trying to cop that Keep and talking to Andrew quite a bit about trying to get one. That's kind of my next go-to grinder for the house, but that's the goal. I've definitely enjoyed, I have the Unibasket, and that's all I use for, I have a flare, but that's what I use on the flare. And it's been like killer, game changer. I've never went back to anything else. So I'm excited for the future to see what Weber brings. So thank you again for coming on the pod. We're super, super glad that we got to chat with you.
Well, thank you guys. And keep doing what you do as well. I appreciate it. I think it's great. And I look forward to speaking again.